Our next speaker is Commodore Shantanu Jha, in the Strategy Directorate of the Indian Navy, who's going to talk about flags of convenience, their pros and their cons. So, Commodore, over to you, and thank you.
Thank you, sir. With the Chief of Naval Staff, my present boss sitting in the front row, and my 5 ex-bosses sitting, I promise you I'll not take more than 14 minutes, sir. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Naam, Namak, and Nishan. The Indian Armed Forces, especially the Indian Army, swear by this adage. Naam, or the name of the unit, Namak, or salt, which signifies the loyalty to comrades, and Nishan, or flag, for which we fight and for which we die, or rather make our enemy die. Our ancient epics of Ramayana and Mahabharata mention dhwaj, or flags being carried by the central characters, often representing what they stood for. These flags were a source of cohesion and a rallying point for troops and legions during combat. In fact, if the flag was captured or defaced, you were deemed to have lost the battle. In addition to its martial significance, a flag also lends identity to those carrying it. And therefore, in my humble opinion, a flag stands for a cause and definitely not for convenience. But moving our attention from terra firma to the seas, my aim today is to present a viewpoint from the ship's bridge on flags of convenience versus national ownership. Ladies and gentlemen, at sea, just like land, flags have always been carried for similar reasons, specifically when ships began sailing farther from home. In the age of sail, when merchantmen traded across continents, they were threatened by plunder and piracy. That is where the need for navies with longer sea legs emerged, aptly posited by Admiral Mahan and just this morning by my guru, Professor Till. And I quote, "The necessity of a navy springs from the existence of peaceful shipping and disappears with it," unquote. Flying the flag of the sovereign they represented afforded merchantmen protection and support from their men of war across far reaches of the ocean. National ownership and flagging were always part of the course. And it was not just from the merchantman's perspective, but also from any state's point of view as well. Contrary to the land, oceans have always been largely uncontrolled, unowned, and unregulated. Ambassador Verma just alluded to it, as did CNS in his keynote address yesterday. Uncontrolled because nearly 70% of the earth is oceans, 85% of the nation states have access to the seas, and yet its fluidity means that one cannot seize, hold, or occupy these vast waters. Unowned because only about 5% of the seas, being territorial, are confined by the laws of the land, while the remaining 95% are free for navigation and overflight. This lack of legal ownership translates into the seas remaining largely unregulated. And therefore, it has been in the interest of states to regulate the seas, even those far from their coastline. National flagging provides one such means. It addresses a number of issues. Foremost, ships under a state's flag or ownership contribute directly to its maritime power and, in times of need, add to the sea lift capabilities. Dunkirk evacuations in the Second World War could be viewed as a case in point. The Royal Navy's operations during the Falklands War is another. In 2016, China came out with a set of technical guidelines that mandated all civilian shipbuilders to ensure that their new vessels are suitable for military use in case of an emergency. In recent years, China has been using Singapore-registered but nationally owned Sinopec tankers to fuel their warships in the Indian Ocean region. National ownership and flagging accrue added benefits, such as stringent safety, labor, and environmental norms, as well as robust enforcement mechanism resulting in greater compliance to rules and regulations. But state control also means increased bureaucratic and economic burden. And that is where the tide begins to turn. Ladies and gentlemen, money is a coward, and trade will flow where there is no conflict. And as the vessel owners scout for cheaper, hassle-free, and non-intrusive options, which in itself may not be a bad choice, but at the cost of compromising on the vessel's security and safety, we are not so sure. This demand for convenience created open registries, that is, states that accept registration of vessels from any other nation with fewer or hardly any restrictions. It is believed that Belen Zada, a small Canadian-American cargo vessel in 1919, was the first vessel to be transferred to the Panama flag so that she could engage, of all the things, rum running to avoid American prohibition laws. Trust the connection between navies and the good old monk rum to always be the start of something new. Soon enough, a large number of US passenger ships who were finding it difficult to operate with prohibitive laws shifted to open registries, thereby increasing profits. Panama, too, started generating revenue from the unlikeliest of services. The shipping industry, as well as weaker states looking for economic sources of revenue, took note of this, and the floodgates opened. In what could be viewed as a case of the prisoner's dilemma game of regulation being resolved in an entirely negative fashion, open registries have engaged in something short of a race to the bottom to put their sovereign for sale. Even landlocked, or as Admiral K.B. Singh said this morning, land-linked countries like Bolivia and Mongolia have jumped into the market. As a result, while in the 1950s, open registries accounted for less than 5% of the global fleet, today these account for nearly 60%. The top 3 flag states, Liberia, Panama, and Marshall Islands, belong to this category, accounting for nearly 46% of the global fleet by tonnage. As a ballpark, for every 1,000 tons of shipping, only 300 belong to nationally owned and flagged ships, while 600 tons are accounted in open registries, and the remaining 100 belonging to the category of ships in other foreign registries. Many of these registries, in addition to being open, provide ease of access. One can reflag in as less as 48 hours. They impose minimal or no income tax without domestic crewing requirements, and more pedantly, lack the power and administration to effectively impose regulations. By design, these registries offer win-win solutions, profits for both the service provider and the customer. For example, in the 90s, Liberia's 50 to 75% revenues came from registry, while Exxon, a shipping company, estimated that it would cost 78% less to operate a 28-man tanker from the Philippines than one from the United States. With profits trumping everything else, and this is something that we've been hearing time and time again since yesterday, that trade will flow where it is feasible for the commerce to do so. Organized labor, environmentalists, security experts, and traditional maritime nations started voicing their concerns. The International Transport Workers Federation in 1948 inaugurated their campaign against flags of convenience, which was incidentally the first time this phrase was used, FOCs. Today, the ITF's Fair Practices Committee determines which country fall into the category of FOC. Currently, there are 42 of these, and mind you, not all are small, economically weaker nations. The French and the German international ship registers too form part of this list. That said, this list does not include registries such as Singapore or Hong Kong, which do allow foreign vessels but add more premium to their flag through stringent norms and compliance. In addition to the convenience that open registries offer, globalization and good order at sea are contributors too. Containers have transformed the way the world trades, and any disruption has severe ramifications across geographies, be it the tanker war of the 80s, the food grain crisis due to the ongoing conflict in Europe, or the 6-day blocking of the Suez Canal by MV Ever Given. No state wants international shipping lanes being affected even for a day. Navies, therefore, deploy farther from the coast to ensure that good order prevails at sea, which benefits not just their own flagships, but also the transit the same waters. Since the security concerns began getting addressed irrespective of the flag being flown, for the owners, it made perfect business sense to go for FOCs instead of sticking to traditional national flagging. And, ladies and gentlemen, it is completely legal to do so. The international law allows adopting FOCs. The UNCLOS Article 91 stipulates that each state shall fix the conditions for the grant of nationality to ships, for the registration of ships in its territory, and for the right to fly its flag. In order to avoid disorder and misuse, the UNCLOS Article 94 mandates that the state must have effectively exercised its jurisdiction and control in administrative, technical, and social matters over ships flying its flag. However, the subjectivity of this clause opens up a gray zone of sorts to circumvent the spirit behind these articulations. In 1986, interestingly, there was an attempt to promulgate a UN Convention on the Conditions of Registration to strengthen the requirements for ships to have a genuine link with the flag state. However, it was ratified by only 15 countries, far short of the 40 needed to enter into force. Notwithstanding the law, for the sailor in me, a flag means much more than convenience, as I said earlier. And that is where the cognitive dissonance with the FOCs begins to take shape. Let's take an example. While on a watch at sea, when one picks up an AIS input to find that the vessel is, let's say, registered at Liberia, owned by a Hong Kong-based company, the last port of call was Cambodia, destination is Madagascar, the crew is a mix of mariners from India, Bangladesh, and Philippines, the default setting is to view it with concern. I'm not singling out countries here, but only trying to convey the point that for a warship out at patrol, FOC is one of the filters to pursue further investigations of vessels. The UNCLOS allows warships to stop, board, and search vessels, but in strictly defined situations, including when the flag is itself suspect. Otherwise, the UNCLOS directs that matter be reported to the flag state, which can further investigate the claim and take necessary action, including physical intervention. And that is where, once again, the FOCs add to the jurisdictional quagmire. When you have nearly 90% of global shipping being produced in China, Korea, and Japan, 41% of the fleet being owned among Greece, China, and Japan, 60% of the shipping by tonnage registered with smaller FOCs, and more than 50% of seafarers coming from the Philippines, Indonesia, China, India, and Russia, when responding to a maritime incident, problems of jurisdiction are bound to be vexed. Law of the flag is the start point in most of these cases. In the case of FOCs, where the owner and registry are not genuinely linked, delays in decision-making and responses become inevitable. When the scourge of piracy in the Gulf of Aden began to take roots, FOCs suffered. MV Iceberg 1, the Panama-flagged and Dubai-based company RoRo, was hijacked in 2010, and the 25-member crew, comprising nationals from 6 different countries, were held hostage for a record of 1,174 days. States offering FOC themselves do not have the wherewithal or the intent to ensure safety and security of the vessels flying their flag, and this facet is completely left up to the goodwill of responsible maritime nations. However, the problems associated with maritime security of the FOCs are not limited to big ships alone, but equally importantly and increasingly alarmingly extend to smaller vessels. In terms of fishing vessels, FOC and ease of reflagging have been an enabler to engage in IUU fishing. Data suggest that 1 in every 5 fish that is landed comes from potentially unauthorized or internationally unregulated vessels. Abusive reflagging or flag hopping afforded by the prevalent administrative and legal ease at open registries exacerbate this issue. The losses by some estimates range from $26 billion to $50 billion to coastal and island states, not to forget the irreversible ecological damage it causes. Of course, it is a completely different matter that in our waters, our fish are dying more of old age. That said, nationally owned and flagged fishing vessels too are not entirely blameless. The Chinese fishing fleet and militia, for example, has been undermining legitimate interests of others in the South China Sea, with activities going much beyond illegal fishing alone. The fact that only 50% of the Chinese distant water fleets matches with the AIS underscores the rampant abuse of flagging norms. Apart from IUU fishing, FOCs also allow smaller dhows or boats to camouflage identity and hide their true purpose to undertake other illegal activities at sea, including armed robbery, terrorism, narcotic smuggling, gun running, irregular human trafficking, etc. Examples are aplenty. Ladies and gentlemen, therefore, to conclude, from a practitioner's perspective, the flags of convenience compound maritime security calculus and can be perceived more as flags of non-compliance. I believe the future of FOCs will depend upon the vector addition of multiple forces at play: law, economics, security, environment, and human capital. In the end, the ensuing tussle between convenience, cost, compliance, correctness, and cause will dictate the course that the FOC regime will take. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Commodore, for what I think is a very professional review of the business of flagging, which, as you say, is a kind of central paradox there. It's basically a means of regulation, but at the same time, that requires a capacity to enforce it, and the ease of reflagging or flag hopping and all the rest of it makes that extremely difficult. So thank you very much indeed for that.